Hey everyone, it's Kate Itassi, and this is Hammer Time with Nikki and Kate. Nikki, unfortunately, is not with us. She is still on her summer hiatus, but she is busy working on her new nutrition education and coaching program, which is going to be really exciting to watch the success of. Nikki is a very dedicated and established personal trainer, and she's now branching out into nutrition coaching with an emphasis on loving yourself and putting yourself first. So she's going to try and focus on helping women get the lifestyle that will make them the best version of themselves. And a big part of that lifestyle has to include eating better and moving and taking care of yourself, both physically and mentally. So today's episode, which I will be speaking solo, once again, and I apologize for that in advance, is on self-hate and female rivalry. So I've actually been reading a lot of books and listening to a lot of incredibly established women talk about a variety of issues in which we knock ourselves down, both as a gender, as a sex, and within ourselves. And, part of that, sure, can be by the individual person's self-defeatist attitude, but I think a lot of it also comes from society and our expectations of what we should be and what we should accomplish throughout our lives. So I wanted to do this episode to hopefully inspire more women to support not only each other, but to support themselves and love themselves. So it mirrors our self-love and self-care episode a few months back. So with that, I will go ahead and start the episode. All right, so once again, my name is Kate. I'm part of one part of the duo Hammer Time with Nikki and Kate. We're available on iTunes, Google Play, on our website, hammertimewithnikkiandkate.com, and that's spelled Nikki. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter, Tumblr, Google+, and YouTube. So in any of those mediums, if you want to follow us or send us a comment or an email, please feel free to do so. We'd love to hear back from our listeners, and we've been really appreciative of the feedback that we've gotten thus far from the podcast. So please keep it coming. So the first topic that I wanted to kind of focus on is obviously a big one, which is weight and body image. And I've really been inspired by a number of not only books but documentaries and speeches, women and wonderful role models on body positivity. And so I can also speak from experience. I've had body issues, especially being a hammer and weight thrower. At one point I was doing a lot of physical activity, so I was losing weight. I also was neglecting my diabetes and created my own version of an eating disorder. I decided to not cover the amount of food that I was eating with the requisite amount of insulin. And what that does is it basically doesn't let your body properly process and digest the food that you're eating. So in my teenage brain, I'm thinking, well, if my body can't digest it properly, then the calories won't count. So what I would do is I would binge eat, kind of to rebel against the fact that I had to be on a more restricted diet as a diabetic, and not cover it with insulin, which was incredibly dangerous and could have led to my death and almost led to me going blind. And I get into that a lot in my upcoming book. But I did that because I didn't want to gain any more weight. So from freshman year of high school to the summer before starting my senior year of high school, so after 3 seasons of high school track and field and lifting, I had gained a good 60 pounds. And yes, a lot of that was muscle, but I have basically no body definition. I've never really had any kind of definition or tone to my body. So whenever I have muscle, it is covered up under what looks like pudge. So it was my formative teenage years. I wanted to be attractive to the opposite sex. And so I decided to really what ended up being shortening my lifespan in order to keep a few pounds away. So I really, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I've had 49 surgeries in the last 30 years, and a lot of those were due to diabetic complications. So a lot of those were, I would like to say maybe quickened by my my neglect of my disease. And so I've done a lot of reflection as to why I would do that. Why shorten my lifespan? Why make myself endure over 24 laser eye surgeries that required over 10,000 laser points into my eyes, about a half dozen injections into my eyeballs, both my eyes hemorrhaging, getting cataracts in both eyes, having scar tissue form over the cataract lenses and having to have those burnt off, having my hands sort of seize up with what's called trigger finger syndrome. It's also, the technical term is tenosynovitis, and your fingers get locked in either a straight or a bent position. I've had tumors grow in my breasts due to taking insulin for too long, and have had nerves in my body damaged and deadened. So I've really had a lot of stuff going on. And yes, I read the other day that 80-something% of diabetics who've been diabetic for 20 years or longer will get diabetic retinopathy, which is the eye problems that I had. So sure, would I have had that problem? Would my eyes have leaked blood from the blood vessels into the retina? Sure, probably, almost definitely. Would they have come on so strongly and made it so that I almost went blind? Probably not. And so a lot of that had to do with vanity. I mean, it's just pure and simple vanity. And I have to take responsibility for that. I did that to myself. But it's also, I think, the pressure that is put on young women to look a certain way. And especially female athletes. I know, unfortunately, far too many female athletes who have had eating disorders. And, whether it's exercise bulimia or straight bulimia, binging and purging, or anorexia, or my version of, I guess, diabetic bulimia, you might call it. I think there's really, it's a duality of existence. So I existed as the athlete, as the 8-time national high school champion, as the state record holder, a member of the U.S. Junior World Championship team in 2000, I have these accolades and I existed and was very confident, got a full ride to Penn State, went to NCAAs twice. But then I was also a young woman, and I made these decisions, but I made them not in a bubble, not in isolation. I made them in comparison to the other young women around me and what they looked like versus what I looked like. The fact that some boys were intimidated by my physical strength, and the fact that I did have a more solid frame than a lot of the more petite young women in my social circles. So it was something that is not, people think about, the Kardashians losing weight, getting lip injections, butt injections, young women trying to just make themselves thin or pretty or conforming to societal standards of beauty, but it's deadly. For a lot of people, it's deadly. I had a teammate whose sister was severely, severely anorexic and was hospitalized and almost died. And young women and young men die each year from anorexia and bulimia and other eating disorders. So it's not something to be taken so lightly. And so the first thing that kind of sparked my desire to do this podcast episode was reading Roxane Gay's book, Hunger. And in it, she explains that she was gang raped when she was a young woman by a young man she thought to be her boyfriend at the time, as well as a group of his friends. And he had lured her to a cabin in the woods, and they raped her. From that point on, she decided to make herself as physically large as possible in order to be less attractive to the male gender, to the male sex. And that really not only did it hit home for me, but I found it so brave and courageous to explain in her book her struggles with eating, her struggles with her family, reacting to her rapid weight gain, sending her to, I believe, a weight loss camp at some point, and then her immediately putting the weight back on when she returned to boarding school. And I could identify with that pressure to conform to a certain physical standard. I had one in my duality of being an athlete, but also a young female. I had those who were supporting my athletic career telling me to gain weight, gain muscle mass, not become too lean, because it was negatively affecting my throwing and negatively affecting my team's results as well as my own results. And on the other hand, I had female members of my family try to bribe me to lose weight and would offer a new wardrobe if I did. I'd have comments that my biceps were larger than their thighs. I'd have, at one point, one family member put a scale down for me to step on to see how much I weighed. So it was really this fighting duality of existing as the athlete and the female in America. And so obviously Roxane's trauma and her response to that trauma was different from my own decision for vanity's sake, to look more attractive. She made the decision to endanger her health to become less attractive. On that same note was a recent documentary on Hulu called Tiny Shoulders, which was about Barbie and her evolution over the last, I think, 50 years or so. And obviously, her inaccurate dimensions as she came to grow into a more voluptuous, thin-waisted woman who would pretty much anatomically topple over if she were a real human being. And then to, I think it's Mattel, deciding how to change the image. And should they? Should they change it due to societal pressure to reflect more realistic examples of what young women look like, both in ethnicity, race, height, and size? Or should they keep true to their brand and keep true to who Barbie was and understand the extent to which Barbie did not represent every young woman, and to not take the doll so seriously? And so it's a really interesting documentary, but obviously within it, there's this debate, more in a business aspect of, well, you know, it's going to cost more money to make more doll shapes. The clothes aren't going to be interchangeable. The shoes aren't going to be interchangeable. We're going to have to change the width of the cars or the height of the elevators in Barbie's dream house to the more socially responsible members of the team, the Barbie team, saying that young women should not have to just look at a very, very large-chested, thin-waisted, blonde woman as the ideal image of what beautiful woman is. And so within that time span of watching that documentary, I was reading Ashley Graham's memoir. And obviously she is a plus-size model, or I believe she might call a real-size model. But obviously anything over, I believe, a 10 or a 12 is considered plus-size, whereas the average size of an American woman, I think now, is like a 14 or a 16. So you don't have a lot of models going down the runway looking like the average woman, you know, but we're also in an age where we no longer have a ton of models looking like Kate Moss, that heroin chic era in the 90s. So we have to acknowledge that there has been some sort of positive change, but is it enough? And so should Ashley Graham be groundbreaking when she comes out with a swimsuit line and decides to use the unedited, unairbrushed paparazzi shots as her shots for the new line? I mean, that to me was incredibly bold and brave, and also really inspiring to know that, you know, with all the Instagram filters out there, with all the photo editing that goes on with selfies, that we can have someone who is representing a realistically sized woman in America, who is healthy, who is not overeating, you know, is not lazy as I think a lot of overweight people are stereotypically seen as, you know, that if they really just got off their butts and got on a treadmill, that they would be in better shape. That's not the case. There are a lot of medical conditions out there that prevent people from a lot of physical activity. There are medical conditions that slow down the metabolism rates in people. And some people are just naturally a larger size. So are there people who need to be more physically active? Absolutely. Need to be better eaters? Absolutely. You know, the documentary Super Size Me was pretty influential as to the sizes that come with fast food chains, with sodas, whether children are served healthy food options at school. So there's been a lot of efforts as to acting more responsibly if you're a fast food chain. But to be quite honest and fair, with the subsidies that certain agricultural industries receive, it's just cheaper. It's cheaper to eat poorly. And so I think that, especially when you have lower socioeconomic statuses in your certain areas, in your states, in the country, there are going to be people who just can't afford to eat and shop at Whole Foods every day. They just can't. I mean, maybe now that Amazon's bought them, it'll be a little bit cheaper, but it's a really difficult thing to think about the weight and body image issues of young men and women in this country, and the expectations that we put not only on others, but on ourselves. And so I would like to think that as anyone grows older, they're going to have a little bit more self-confidence to be able to accept their body, love their body, appreciate their body, respect their body, treat it with kindness, not do forms of self-harm like eating disorders. But we need to be kind not only to each other, but to ourselves. And if you see other females out there, which happens, and I'm not going to say I haven't done it in the past, commenting on what another woman is wearing or a young girl is wearing, or her weight or her physical appearance, we need to shut it down. We need to speak up and promote self-love and love and respect of others instead of knocking somebody else down. And so the next thing that I wanted to talk about was the amount of animosity and rivalry among women. I'm not sure, obviously being 34 years old, I'm not sure personally whether it's gotten better or worse over the years, but there seems to be certain camps that divide us as a sex. And a huge one that I think everyone can understand is the career woman versus the stay-at-home mom. And so I think that there's a lot of animosity going on and a lot of justification of one's lifestyle. And by justifying your lifestyle, you're knocking the other person's lifestyle. So stay-at-home moms might say, hey, this is the toughest job in the world. I'm devoting my life and my time and my resources towards raising the next generation, and there's nothing more important than that. And then you have career women who are saying, look, we have more choices than just being mothers, and that we need to bridge the gender inequity gap in wage earning, and we need to get out there and show that we're just as competent and capable of performing a number of professions and occupations as men are. And so in order to do that, sometimes we do have to make sacrifices in the home. Now, in that Tiny Shoulders documentary, Gloria Steinem was speaking about the myth of having it all and how she gets upset at the fact that the idea of you can have it all, a post-60s feminist wave woman can have everything that she wants. And I obviously bought into that. I bought into that idea that I, as a diabetic, could have anything I wanted, achieve anything that I wanted. And that turned out to be untrue. And part of that was because of the neglect that I took on my body for about a decade. But another part of that is the fact that I have physical limitations. And that, coupled with my spinal disorder, makes it impossible for me to do everything that I wanted to do. I attended the ACLU's national conference in DC last week, which was incredible, but it was a bit bittersweet. And I really struggled with that because I am disabled at this point in my life and am a few months post spinal surgery, my second spinal surgery for tethered spinal cord. And I am past the incision pain and have now felt the original nerve pain that pretty much made me bedridden for the last 2.5 years. And so to go to this conference and then endure so much pain that it laid me out again, it was really kind of a shocking, resounding, blaring horn that I can't go back to what I was. I can't go back to being on the national board. I can't probably go on a local board because my body won't let me do it. But this pressure that women have, this post-feminist woman allegedly has, is bullshit. And Gloria Steinem, one of the most influential feminists of our time, says so. And I completely and wholeheartedly agree with her. And I think we do a lot of disservice to each other and to ourselves by buying into that myth. There's only a certain amount of hours in the day, obviously, and there's only a certain amount of energy that each person has. And you can't burn the candlestick at both ends. It's just not going to end up well. You know, you can go hard and fast for a short amount of time and then collapse before the finish line, or you can lead a more balanced lifestyle and recognize that you might not have everything you could have ever possibly dreamed of having or doing or being, but that you're living a happier and healthier and more balanced life. And so I see so much animosity between not only career women versus stay-at-home moms, but moms who work versus stay-at-home moms. And there's a lot of guilt already put upon working moms by themselves, that they're not there for their children, that they might have to miss games or recitals or practices, that they can't be there for their children's milestones. And then you have stay-at-home moms who are sometimes stereotyped as, you know, sitting by the TV watching soap operas, eating bonbons. And so there's a lot of daggers being thrown each way, and I think it does nobody any service whatsoever. I don't see how that makes us move forward as a sex, as a gender, or as a country. I don't see how putting that pressure on ourselves or upon other people does anyone any good. I've also seen women hating or envying other women because of they'll hit their milestones, certain milestones before others. So as an example, I was engaged during law school, and I had some friends, some law school classmates who were older than I was at the time, and they had been with their significant other for a longer period of time than I had been with mine, and they had yet to get engaged. And I received some, and not only animosity, but I could almost see like seething jealousy and almost borderline hatred at the fact that I got engaged and they hadn't yet. And that always confused me. I had a lot of friends in college who would say, I'm going to have, I'm going to be engaged by this age. I'm going to be married by this age. I'm going to have 2 kids by this age, buy a house by this age. Life doesn't work that way. And if you put that pressure on yourself to hit those milestones, or you emphasize hitting the milestone more than who you're hitting it with, finding whoever is around at the time that you want to get married and just trying to link up with that person instead of figuring out whether they're the right person for you, I really think it's going to do you a lot more harm in the long run. I mean, there's no person clocking us. There's no person, timing us to see who gets to these milestones first. So why can't we support each other's happiness instead of being so enviable and so full of resentment towards others and their happiness that we choose to tear them down or not be supportive of them? Another one that I've seen, and this goes into my reading the books of the hilarious bloggess Jenny Lawson, is that there is a lot of competition within stay-at-home moms as to who's being the best mom, the best homemaker, the best wife, kind of in that 1950s lifestyle, but almost surrounding around Pinterest and who can create the most homemade, gift bags for the child's birthday, who can send their child to school with the cutest lunch or dress them in the cutest clothes. Nikki and I were actually just having a conversation this morning about children's clothing. And yes, it's adorable, but a lot of it's also very expensive. And let's not kid ourselves. The clothing, especially before a certain age, is not for the child. That child is not going to remember it. Sure, there might be some pictures later on in their life that are brought back to tease or embarrass them based upon what they were wearing. I have quite a few of those, actually, from the mid-'80s. But the kid isn't going to care whether they're wearing, Michael Jordan shoes that they grow out of in 2 months. The kid's not going to care if they're wearing, the cutest Baby Gap clothing that they'll just inevitably spit up on and have to be changed out of. So why is there competition among parents, specifically among mothers, and even more specifically, as Jenny Lawson mentions, stay-at-home moms who are trying to show that they are making the most out of their days and that they aren't lazy and just sitting around watching TV and eating junk food, that they are helping their children with their school projects. The movie Bad Moms begins with Mila Kunis doing Richard Nixon paper mache figurehead for his son for the school project. And I think it's kind of hitting on a true point that a parent, maybe not for the child's sake, but for their own reputation as a parent, decides to either take over or make their child up in more expensive clothing or, try and be the most creative or it kind of boggles my mind that we would, as a species, be more concerned with who's the most creative stay-at-home mom or mom in general than we would be on the greater issues at hand. I don't really understand it. I can understand that you might fall prey to it when you're in the situation, but I just see no positive thing coming out of it. And then don't deceive yourself by thinking that your children aren't going to pick up on that and pick up on that competitive nature and that sense of knocking others down while boosting yourself up. Gabrielle Union has talked about this a lot. I think she did a speech or an acceptance speech somewhere. She's written about it in her book, and she did a recent episode of Red Table Talk with Jada Pinkett Smith. And she explains that, you know, she was a mean girl. She was at one point a mean girl, and at one point in her life, she hired a life coach who was also a personal trainer, and she ended up bringing this life coach with her to a party, an industry party. And she, you know, lets the life coach, you know, go mingle with others while she talks to a group of partygoers and continues to berate and mock and gossip about another woman in the industry for the better part of an hour. And afterwards, the life coach comes up to her and says, "What did you get out of that?" And confused, Gabrielle Union says, "Well, I what do you mean?" She said, "Did your house get any bigger while you were tearing her down? Did you get a role that you wanted while you were tearing her down? Did your personal things in life get any bigger or more expensive because you tore this other woman down?" I mean, the only thing that showed is how much that woman's in your head and how insecure you are about yourself in comparison to that woman, because you were so focused on her that you ended up talking about her for the better part of an hour. And what does that do? Does knocking somebody else down boost you up? And that's so important, because there's not a certain number of, you know, awards to be handed out for the best human being at the end of our lives. Every person can be a success, can be a winner without having to knock somebody else down. And of course, Gabrielle Union talks about how she was insecure of, you know, especially in the industry, maybe she was insecure that this other person would take a role that she might be going out for. And that obviously happens in interviews in the industry, within jobs when you're trying to get a promotion. But in my opinion, it does end up making you look small. And again, I am not exempting myself from this. I have gossiped. I have come from a long line of gossips. And I think women are particularly prone to gossiping about other women. And we're hypercritical about each other. And part of it might be biological, to try and tear each other down to be able to vie for the best male to breed with or whatever. I don't know. But we have to evolve to the point where we can check ourselves. You know, I'm not saying that I'm never going to gossip ever again in my life, but I'm going to try, as Gabrielle Union talks about, to try and not be that person, to snap yourself out of it. It just makes you look worse and isn't going to stop the other person from being more qualified or the better choice for the role or the job or the promotion or whatever it is in life. So I believe that there is an infinite amount of happiness in this world that each person can find and attain and maintain that has absolutely nothing to do with whether somebody else has happiness or whether they're happier than you are at that particular moment. Because best believe we're all going through cycles of happiness, levels of happiness, of unhappiness. We all go through struggles and obstacles in our lives. So there's going to be times where you're on top one moment and you might be on the bottom on the next. So in my opinion, I'd rather not produce that bad karma and risk humiliating myself just to feel good that I've put down somebody else. You know, in terms of jurors, as a prosecutor, as a criminal defense attorney, as a criminal defense attorney, I was taught and I believed that female jurors are more critical of females. So even for, say, a rape case, a male juror might be more likely to believe the female story, whereas a female juror might criticize what that woman was doing out that late, doing there at a club by herself, going to the man's apartment by herself, you know, etc., and being more skeptical about whether the woman's story, the complainant's story, is believable or not than a male juror would. So as a defense attorney, you know, I would want more females on my jury, because the more females, the more reasonable doubt there is that my client committed the crime. And that's just pure and simple the way it is. I mean, that's just a matter of studying the psychological aspects of jurors. And yes, that does stereotype. And there are certainly a lot of women who wouldn't participate in that kind of hypercritical thinking. But I think in general, we're just bred to be more competitive and more combative and more critical of each other as a sex. And I found that with female prosecutors who I went up against. You know, I'm okay, or I was okay, with any prosecutor who is tough, who is not going to be a pushover. I am more than okay with that. I am certainly happy to face off against the best, most educated, well-trained prosecutor there is. But I do not believe in being an asshole just to be an asshole. And no offense, but in my personal opinion, I found more females who were prosecuting, who I went up against, who threw up barriers and blockades or objected or refused to compromise for no perceived or understandable reason other than just to be an asshole. And I think that in their minds, they were trying to prove themselves as being tough, that they weren't going to be a pushover just because they were female. But I had more respect for the male prosecutors who were tough, but who weren't unnecessarily obstructive just to prove how tough they were. And I think that there was a lot more animosity between myself and certain female prosecutors out there than there was between myself and male prosecutors. And obviously this is a small sample size, it's just my opinion, but I truly found that there was a lot of unnecessary criticism among females within my own profession. And even with a judge who is female, and this, again, is an overgeneralization, but there were many instances in my personal experience where I found that certain female judges were harder on female defense attorneys or plaintiff's attorneys or prosecutors than they were on the male counterparts. And sure, one could say that the judge wanted to just help females understand that it's still, well, it might not be a male-dominated field anymore. I think the latest I heard was that it was pretty much 50-50 enrollment of males and females in law schools. But up until very, very recently, it was a male-dominated, white male-dominated field. And so you had to be tough. You had to be more prepared and better educated and more aggressive than perhaps your male counterparts. But it does make me sad that there's so much self-hate and hatred among ourselves as a sex and a gender, because I don't really see that among men. I don't. Sure, there's competition. Sure, there are men that are cutthroat that are going to throw another man under the bus in order to get what they want out of a job, a woman, what have you. But in general, I think that we as females still have a ways to go in terms of loving ourselves better, and not just ourselves, meaning the group of us, but us as individuals. And it has to start with females who are raising the next generation, making it clear to them that it is okay to be whatever size you are as long as you're healthy, or making clear to them that regardless of whether they receive animosity from another person, that they don't have to respond in kind. When a parent sees a young person gossiping about another person, shutting them down at that moment and saying, look, where is that getting you? You know, taking from Gabrielle Union's life coach and saying, you know, what did that get you? Did it make you get better grades in school? Did it gain you more friends? Did it get you into a better college? Did it get you, you know, the latest iPhone? Of course it didn't. And it didn't do anything but make you look small and insecure as a person. And so I think if we stop the tearing down of others, then we might expose why we're tearing them down and expose our own insecurities and be able to get to those and repair those in order for the next generation to see that we are more okay with ourselves and our flaws and our imperfections than those that came before us, and that we can love ourselves and love each other and support one another without having to resort to tearing one another down. So again, this broadcast was really almost a parallel to our self-care and self-love episode. But I did find that in a lot of media that I had recently been consuming, that there's still a lot of work to be done. And I truly commend and respect the works of those like Roxane Gay and Jenny Lawson and Gabrielle Union, Gloria Steinem, obviously Ashley Graham, you know, all the women who are courageously exposing their own flaws and insecurities in order to tell other young persons and adults that it's okay, that we all have our own flaws, we all have our own weaknesses, we all have our own little bits of self-hate or self-doubt or insecurities. We've all had our obstacles and traumas and challenges, and we've all had those moments of feeling alone or depressed or not good enough. But that's okay. And we should acknowledge and respect each other's hard times and love each other a little bit more. And I think once we do that, then there won't be as many people putting up those fronts that they are, you know, the perfect Facebook family, that they're the perfect Instagram model, that they're the perfect stay-at-home mom or the most successful career woman who doesn't need to have anything else to substantiate her life. I think if we do that, then we will see a lot more happiness with each other and within ourselves. And so I hope this podcast has spoken to at least some of you. I will try and list the resources that I've cited in this podcast so that if you're interested, you can take a look at them or get the books or check out the YouTube speeches or Facebook watch episodes that I've referenced here. Again, Nikki is still on her hiatus, but I'm so excited for her next business venture of nutrition coaching and training. And she is working on an incredible website that I think is also going to help women practice a little less self-hate and a little bit more self-love. So if you want to check out our website, I'll also be posting this to Facebook, Twitter, probably Instagram, Google+, and YouTube. And then we're also, like I said, available on iTunes and Google Play. And once again, this is Kate Utassi, and this is Hammer Time with Nikki and Kate. You can check out our website at Hammer Time with Nikki and Kate, and that's Nikki and Kate.com. And we will see you next time. So thank you for tuning in.
Hammer time, like, boy stupid, don't stupid, I do it, boy, do it, boy, do it, boy, do it, boy stupid, go dumb stupid, don't stupid, I do it, boy, I do it, boy, go stupid, boy stupid, go dumb stupid, don't stupid, I do it, boy, I do it, boy, go stupid.